Water spirits. My first encounter with water spirits occurred at a high mountain lake in northern Idaho. Dr. Mike Gass and I had grunted and gasped our way up the steep rocky trail to the remote lake on the basis of rumors that large, savage, cutthroat trout abounded there. As soon as we arrived, Mike set up operations on a snow slide at one end of the lake, the only good casting area. I wandered around the lake trying to find a place I could cast from, but the shore was wrapped with a thick fir collar right up to the water's edge. Finally, I came upon a slender log extending 30 feet or so into the shallows. I did a balancing act out to the end of it and frantically began tying on the fly. Mike yelled gleefully about a big strike he had just had. Glancing up to see if any fish were rising around me, I noticed a V form near the middle of the lake, a V such as a shark fin makes cutting the water, only tiny. The V swept in a wide half circle and, much to my astonishment, came right up to my feet. I stared down into the V to see what was making it, expecting a fish or maybe a large water bug of some sort. But there was nothing there. Nothing visible was making the V. Jeepers criminy, I said to myself. There's nothing there. While contemplating this curiosity, I glanced again out into the lake. Another V had formed. This one too swept in a wide half circle, only in the opposite direction, and it too came right up to my feet. I stared down into the V with considerable intensity, protruding my eyeballs for a better look. There was nothing in this V either. Being of a scientific bent, I carefully analyzed the situation, taking into account all possibilities for what might have caused the V's and what could account for each of them to zoom right up to my feet. This process took no more than 3 seconds and led me to the only logical conclusion. Water spirits! Water spirits! I yelled, rushing past Mike on my way to the trail. Mike is a calm, practical, no-nonsense man, not easily budged in the direction of panic. Thus it came as no little surprise when he thundered past me on the trail, his fly line snapping like a whip in the wind. He claimed later that he didn't for one moment believe there were actually water spirits present. Because any person with an iota of intellect knows they don't exist. His haste, he explained, was due merely to the fact that he didn't want to be caught after dark in the mountains with a crazy person. It was clear to me that the lake contained water spirits, but I had no idea there was also a crazy person in the vicinity. Neither of us has returned to the lake since. Several years passed without my having further confrontations with water spirits. I now shared a suite of offices with my friend Dick Hoover, a former television newscaster and a university professor. Hoove, as I call him, was now in the business of making films. I was writing magazine articles, spending hours every day hunched over a typewriter. One fine spring day, Hoove was bustling about in the outer office preparing to take a canoe trip down a nearby river to shoot some film of the flora and fauna. Thumping away on the typewriter, I thought, why didn't I have the good sense to go into the filmmaking business so I too could be out canoeing on a beautiful day like this rather than being chained to a stupid typewriter? Hoove left, and I continued to type away, pausing every few minutes to stoke my envy. A couple hours later, the door to the outer office slammed. I listened intently, wondering what irate being had just stormed in, and whether it might be after me. Then I heard footsteps. Squish, 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 squish. I got up and looked out. There was Hoove, streaming with water and spewing forth the rather mild, silent profanity he uses in extreme situations. The canoe had tipped over and dumped him and all his camera gear into the river. An enormous wave of sympathy welled up in me, which I tried to conceal behind the facade of hearty laughter. Often this approach has the therapeutic value of showing the victim of such a mishap the lighter side of the misfortune, and the two of you end up having a jolly good time joshing each other. Occasionally, of course, it leads to one of those uncomfortable social situations in which the victim of the mishap fails to respond appropriately to humor and chooses instead to crush your windpipe. Alas, the therapy failed to take hold on Hoove, who could think only of his filming gear resting on the bottom of the river, and whether throttling a laughing person might constitute a felony. Wiping away the feigned tears of mirth, I said, "By golly, Hoove, maybe all isn't lost. Maybe we can salvage some of your gear from the bottom of the river. I'll go get my canoe and make a grappling hook of some sort, and we can drag the river. There's every chance that water and sand and gravel won't seriously harm expensive and delicate photographic equipment." "I've paddled my last canoe," Hoove growled. "No, what we'll do is I'll borrow a rowboat from my neighbor." "Ha!" I said. "There's no way I'm going to go down that river in a rowboat. A person would have to be out of his mind to take a rowboat down that river." Hours later, Hoove was still in a wretched mood. "Row to the right," he commanded. "I think that's the spot I tipped over in." "The sun's going down," I said, "and this is the 49th spot you think you tipped over in. We'd better get out of here before it gets dark. It's a good 3 miles downriver to the takeout spot." "Oh, let's try one more place," Hoove said. "Listen," I said, "I didn't want to mention this before, but you know the reason you tipped over in the canoe?" "Spare me," Hoove said. "Water spirits," I said. "It was probably water spirits." Hoove stared at me, the homemade grappling hook dangling ominously from his hand. Although I doubted he would grapple me, his stare made me a little nervous. "You're crazy, McManus," Hoove said. "Water spirits?" For the first time that day, he laughed. "I'm not kidding." "I know you're not. That's why I say you're crazy." "Oh, yeah?" I said. "Well, Mr. Smarty, I did some research about the river, and back in the old days, the Indians wouldn't go near this stretch because they believed it was inhabited by evil water spirits." It was true. I had actually read that, even though I didn't need research to support my conviction as to the presence of water spirits. Any fool could see that this creepy section of the river provided them with perfect habitat. "Evil water spirits indeed," Hoove said, chuckling. "How do you come up with this kind of whimsical nonsense?" "Think what you will," I said, "but let's get out of here just the same." Hoove finally acquiesced to my demands, and we drifted off downriver toward our car. The river was high with the spring runoff, but generally placid, and I found it remarkably easy to steer the rowboat, even going with the current. We zipped comfortably through several small rapids. Then we came to a stretch where huge trees reared up on both sides of the river, with an eerie evening light playing upon the water and patches of mist drifting about like stray ghosts out on a lark. "I don't like the looks of this," I said. "What?" Hoove said, seeing nothing but smooth water ahead of us. "This place," I said. "It's quiet. Too quiet. Don't you realize this is a perfect place for evil water spirits to hang out?" "Har, har, har, har," Hoove laughed. We drifted into a wide bend in the river. On the inside of the bend, a large thorn apple tree hung out over the water, raking the current with its branches. There was plenty of room to maneuver around it, so I didn't pay it much attention, preferring to sift the shadows of the woods around us for signs of hostile haunts. Har, 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 hooved Laugh. Har! Watch where you're rowing, McManus. We're headed for that thorn apple tree. There was still enough room to maneuver. I smiled at Hoove and dug the oars into the water. The boat failed to respond. I dug the oars in again, and again, still no response. The oars were now whipping around like twin paddle wheels under full steam, but some Stephen Kingish force was drawing us irresistibly into the thorn apple tree, which, and I didn't imagine this either, reached out for us with its gnarled, spiked limbs and drew us into its deadly embrace, hissing and grinning malevolently as it did so. McManus, you did this deliberately, and Hoove leaped to his feet to fight off the thorn tree, which raked him fore and aft with its vicious claws. Fortunately, we were both wearing life jackets. I dropped the oars and started to jump up to help Hoove fight the tree mano a mano, but something grabbed me from behind and, with enormous power, jerked me half out of the boat and slammed me flat on my back against the surface of the water. They got me! I yelled. Zork! Hoove cried. Ow! Ow! I figured the water spirits had him too. All at once, we burst free of the thorn apple and floated gently off downstream. But the evil water spirits still held me flat against the surface of the water, still doing their best to pull me under. They won't let go of me, I yelled at the shredded Hoove, who seemed to be deliberately ignoring my predicament. The water spirits are trying to drown me. Oh, for gosh sakes, Hoove said. It's only the handle of the oar. When you dropped it, the oar went under the boat and the handle caught under your life jacket. I know that, I said, slipping my life jacket off the oar handle. But don't try to tell me the evil water spirits had nothing to do with it. Hoove glanced nervously over his shoulder. I could tell he was making an effort not to believe in water spirits, but they weren't done with us yet. When we got to where we had parked the old station wagon Hoove used for his filming jaunts, we grabbed the boat, one of the few ever made of cast iron, dragged it up the bank, and shoved it into the rear of the wagon. With a last nervous glance at the river, we roared back toward town. I didn't want to raise the topic of water spirits with Hoove, but I had the eerie feeling a few of the more persistent haunts were clinging to the station wagon. Presently, we heard a serious grinding noise in the back of the car. I looked at Hoove. I could tell he had leaped to the same conclusion I had. You want to stop and check out that noise? I asked, hoping that Hoove would have enough sense not even to consider such a thing, particularly on a dark and lonely road. Better not, he said. Maybe when we get back to town. Right, I said. Upon arriving back in the city, we soon found ourselves trapped in 6 lanes of jammed-up traffic. We were on a well-lighted street, and this seemed like a good place and time to see what the water spirits had been up to with their grinding noise. Hoove opened his door and looked back. The left rear tire was on fire. The left rear tire was not far from the gas tank. The water spirits, having failed to drown us, were now trying to blow us up. I cursed the little buggers roundly, if briefly. Hoove bounded out of the car, yelling, Fire! Fire! The gas tank is going to blow! The occupants of the cars, wedged in tightly around us, responded to this announcement with a good deal of interest. Previously, they had been slumped in their car seats, staring morosely out the windshield at the impacted traffic, perhaps with no other thoughts on their minds than what a hard day they had had at the office. But now, with news of a gas tank about to explode mere feet away, they became suddenly animated and showed not the slightest sign of lethargy or fatigue. I myself had just accompanied 3 businessmen and 2 nuns in synchronized hurdles over several compact cars when I heard Hooves shout, "McManus, stop! We've got to save the boat! It's not mine!" Personally, I thought that was reason enough for not saving it, but Hoove insisted. We rushed back, grabbed the cast iron boat, and holding it over our heads to clear the top of the cars, ran down the street with it, looking for a passage through the traffic jam. I have often wondered what the occupants of the cars 2 blocks away thought when they saw 2 panting middle-aged men running down the street at night carrying a cast iron rowboat over their heads, particularly when one of them looked as if he had recently been fed through a pasta-making machine. With police and fire sirens converging from all sides, they probably thought we had stolen the boat, then forgotten where we had parked our car, and were making our getaway on foot. By the time we got back to Hoove's station wagon, the fire department had arrived and extinguished the flaming tire. One of the firemen walked over to Hoove and asked him what had started the fire. Hoove stood there quivering with exhaustion, his face and arms scratched by thorns and blackened by smoke, his shredded clothes still damp from the morning dunking in the river, which had devoured all his filming gear, and he muttered, "Wheel bearing broke and overheated." I'm not sure why he lied. Both of us knew what it really was that tried to get us. First with water, then with fire. On the other hand, maybe Hoove said the right thing. You never know how firemen might feel about water spirits. Letter to the boss. To Mr. Claire Conway, Editor-in-Chief, Outdoor Life, New York, New York. Dear Claire, good news. You know that expensive new camera you thought you had lost on the Montana fishing trip with me and Jim Zumbo? Well, it turned up. It was still in the drift boat, wedged up under the bow cover. Can you believe it? I thoroughly enjoyed our little outing together. It was a fairly typical fishing trip for me. Thank goodness. You can imagine how nervous a fellow gets the first time he takes his boss on an outing, no matter how commonplace or trivial it might be. You just never know when something might go wrong. I have to chuckle every time I recall your wondering aloud at the party in Kalispell the night before whether it would be safe to go fishing with me. Remember, you said, all the crazy adventures McManus writes about, you sometimes wonder if some of them might actually be true. Wouldn't it be funny if he turned out to be as crazy as he writes? Boy, that line got a great laugh from everybody at the party. I'm sure all those present would have thought it just as funny if they hadn't been your employees. I, for one, thought it was a real thigh bruiser. Anyway, I guess you know that I am a fairly normal guy, even though my imagination does carry me away at times. Oh, about the camera. As soon as it dries out, I'll rinse it good with gasoline to get rid of all the sand and rust. Then I'll send it off to you post haste because I'm sure you're anxious to see what kind of pictures it takes. I don't know much about photography, but I suspect some of the pictures may have been damaged because the film was sort of all lumped together and I probably scratched it quite a bit when I dug it out of the camera with a stick. I wasn't sure, but I thought gasoline might affect the film adversely. Let me know if any of the pictures turn out. particularly the one of Zumbo's big fish. I thanked Alan Christensen of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and David Moles for loaning us the drift boat. Alan joked that he was just glad to get it back in one piece. Did you did hear that we found the boat, didn't you? It was hung up under a log a couple of miles downstream from the rapids. Old David knows how to build a sturdy drift boat. Aside from a few scratches, it was in great shape, even after being winched up the hill of the canyon. The only other borrowed equipment we lost was one oar. You, of course, saved one of the oars by clinging to it even through the worst of the rapids. A less considerate and responsible person would simply have let the oar shift for itself and would have struck out for the shore. Although the canyon walls are so steep there, you probably couldn't have got out anyway. Did you know that? You did the wise thing, which is to float a couple thousand yards down through the canyon, even if you had to spend half the time underwater. Better safe than sorry, I always say. You remember the life jacket you and I had? That friendly little tug of war over just prior to capsizing? Well, even that turned up on a gravel bar downstream from Bonner's Ferry, Idaho. It still had the imprints of your fingers on it. Only kidding. Even though you probably are aware of this, I should explain that I wasn't trying to wrest the life preserver from you, and I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. I was merely attempting to assist you in putting it on. I tried to tell you this at the time, but the roar of the rapids and Zumbo screaming, "We're all gonna die! We're all gonna die!" probably drowned, unfortunate word that, out of my voice. Or maybe even caused you to think I had actually shouted something like, "Give me that, you!" Think about it. Would an employee shout something like that at his boss, particularly after he had just been promised a large raise? Sure, the raise involved the life preserver, although that certainly had nothing to do with my assisting you in putting the preserver on. By the way, the raise hasn't shown up on my paycheck yet. In fact, the paycheck hasn't shown up yet. Would you mention this to the comptroller? Don't be too hard on Zumbo. I realize that the little mishap was totally his fault, but keep in mind that he has written a lot of great stories for the magazine over the years. Still, after all the time he and I have kicked around together, he should have realized I don't know a thing about rowing a drift boat. Jim was certainly remiss in not arguing more forcefully that I not be allowed to row, because he, more than anyone, should have realized that my claim to having vast experience in handling drift boats in rapids was merely an attempt to introduce a little comic relief into the situation. Also, I thought it might take your mind off the treble hook spinner dangling from your ear. And I guess it did that all right. Ha ha ha. Seriously though, I think it would have been wise for you to let me remove the hook with my pocket knife, because unlike drift boat rowing, I do have vast experience removing hooks from ears and even more private parts of the anatomy. Did I mention that Zumbo bumped my arm just as I was getting ready to make that cast? I don't think it was deliberate, but who can tell with Zumbo? Please keep in mind that the whole idea for us to do a fishing trip together was Zumbo's. But as I say, don't be too hard on him. He apparently didn't detect the jesting tone in your shouted threats when you chased him out of the canyon with the oar, which is probably why he lit out for the mountains immediately after the trip and hasn't been seen since. If by any chance you were serious about those threats, I will try to discover his whereabouts for you. What are friends for, I always say. Any chance you can make it out west for a hunting trip with me this fall? My friend Rhett Sweeney has offered to guide if you could see your way clear to send $500 in advance so he can make bail. Don't expect any great amount of excitement. It would just be a typical McManus hunting trip. We'd love to have you along. Think about it. And please, do stop by the comptroller's office and ask about my check. Best regards, Pat. Scritch's Creek, or possibly Scritch's Creek. The first time I saw Ketchum Scritch, I was about 12 and spending the day with the old woodsman, Rancid Crabtree. Ketchum came driving up in an ancient rickety truck that seemed to be puffing smoke from every orifice and portal. He was about as tall a human being as I had ever seen, hard and sinewy, with a week's growth of gray beard and coal-black eyes glinting out of cavernous sockets. And there was a meanness to him. Not the happy meanness of some people I knew, but a serious, no-nonsense meanness. In the truck with him was a little girl with wild tawny hair and great wide blue eyes. She held a dog by the collar. The dog curled a lip at me and growled. Ketchum Scritch told the dog to shut up, and the dog did. I thought probably Scritch could tell just about anything to shut up, and it would. He got out of the truck and walked toward us, carrying a gallon jug. Scritch, Rancid said. Crabtree, Scritch said. Those were about the only two words exchanged between them. Rancid gave Scritch a wad of crumpled up dollar bills and took the jug. Scritch got back in the truck and drove off in a cloud of smoke. I could see the little girl looking back out of the rear window of the truck. After they had gone, I said to Rancid, "How come they call him Ketchum?" "Well, it might be on account he come from Ketchum, Idaho, but I reckon it's 'cause if anybody does him a mean turn and tries to get away, he'll catch him. I recollect years ago there was a feller by the name of Ringo Dance who beat Scritch out of some money. The way I heard the story, Scritch caught up with him in a saloon in a little town up north. Ringo was standing at the bar with some other men when Scritch stepped through the door and called out his name, mean and hard like, 'Dance!' Ringo jumped right out through a winder, and the other fellas, they took one look at Scritch and broke out into a foxtrot. Ha! I guess they didn't know Ringo's last name was Dance." I, for one, certainly did not want to be caught by Ketchum Scritch, whether or not I had done him a bad turn. Little did I know then what lay in store for me a few years hence. "What's in the jug?" I asked Rancid. "Some medicine old Scritch whoops up for me from time to time." "Medicine? Why, you're never sick, Rancid." "That just goes to show what fine medicine it is," Rancid said, and he pulled the cork and took a dose of it. Then he gasped and wheezed and pounded himself on the chest. "Not only that, it's good for tanning hides and curing fence posts." The next time I saw Ketchum Scritch was a couple of years later. My friend Wretch and I had hitchhiked back into the mountains with a couple of loggers to do some fishing. As we rounded a curve, the mountains opened up into a pretty little valley with a stream flowing through it. "Hey, this looks like a good place," Wretch told the loggers. "Just drop us off here and we'll spend the day fishing that stream." "You sure you want to fish there?" the driver said. "Why not?" I asked. "You think it's fished out?" "No," the other logger said. "I can almost guarantee it ain't been fished at all." I caught him sneaking a wink at the driver. "Then this is the place for us," Rex said. "We'd appreciate it if you'd pick us up on your way back tonight." Sure thing, the man who had winked said. Leastwise, we'll pick up as much as we can. Then the two loggers laughed for all they were worth. Looking back, I now realized that they were two of the happy, mean type of people. The fishing in that little stream was as fine as any I'd ever had. After we saw that we wouldn't have any trouble catching our limits, we dumped out our worm cans and started practicing our fly fishing. It was beautiful the way those fat little cutthroat would tear into our black gnats, and every once in a while we would nail a 12 or 14-incher. And once this huge red belly flashed out from under a log and snapped my leader as if it were a cobweb. I told myself I'd have to come back and try for that fish again. It was one of those fish that swim forever in the dark currents of your mind until you catch them. Then you eat them and forget them. After Wretch and I each had a good string of fish, we stashed them and our fishing rods and went exploring. We walked down the middle of the creek, singing and whistling and philosophizing, enjoying the cool, clinging wetness on our legs, the hot sun toasting our backs, and the creek itself dappled with golden light beneath a veil of alder leaves. It was wonderful. Then I happened to notice a shed off to one side, almost concealed by honeysuckle. Why, look there, I said to Wretch. Somebody has built himself a little cabin. I'll be danged, Wretch said. Maybe it was built by an old prospector and he got froze to death or something and left some gold nuggets laying around. Let's go take a look. As we scrambled out of the creek and started up the bank to the shed, a voice boomed, "Whoa there!" We both whoaed. It was the sort of voice that, if it had said dance, you instantly would have broken into a foxtrot. I looked around, and there stood Ketchum Scritch. "What in tarnation you think you doing?" While I was still sorting through my hoard of lies for a good one, Wretch stammered out, "Why, we're lost. Yes, sir, we're lost." "Yeah," I said, picking up the cue. But before I could embroider the lie with some colorful and authentic details, Ketchum snatched Wretch up by the shirt and held him straight out at arm's length. Wretch's feet ran furiously in empty space. "I don't know whether to skin you now or wait until the next time I catch you snooping around my property," Scritch said, looking as if he favored now. "Next time would suit me better," Wretch whined, "'cause there ain't going to be no next time." Then Scritch dropped him. Wretch's feet being already revved up, he spun a couple of shallow furrows in the sod and then shot off through the brush, across the creek, and up the side of a mountain before I had even jammed myself into first gear. Scritch looked down at me. "I seen your skinny carcass somewheres before," he said, "when I caught those poor fellas in here last year. You ain't by any chance the lucky one who got away, are you?" No, sir," I said. "This is my first time, and I was just passing through, trying to find my way home." "Well, then, I want you to do just two things. The first is to pick up them fish you stashed up the creek." "Yes, sir. And what's the other?" "The other is get." After picking up the strings of fish, I set what might well have been the world's record for getting. Wretch and I were so scared that it was at least a week before we even thought about going back to fish Scritch's Creek. It seemed such a shame, all those fine, fat cutthroat going to waste. We began to speculate that maybe old Scritch was more bark than bite, and decided to ask Rancid Crabtree his opinion. "What age you be now?" Rancid asked. 14. Well, then, then I wouldn't try fishing that creek again, 'cause Scritch considers anybody over 12 a keeper. What's he use that old shed for, anyway? I expect that's where he keeps the one he don't throw back. You boys best steer clear of Scritch. We didn't talk about fishing Scritch's Creek anymore, but I couldn't get the thought of that huge magical cutthroat out of my mind, the one that had snapped my leader. Several times in moments of fish madness I nearly sneaked back there, but the image of Ketchum holding Wretch in the air at arm's length would shock me back to sanity. I was left with only my memory of that fine morning on Scritch's Creek and a gnawing in my belly to fish it again. A couple of years passed, and I became almost as interested in girls as I was in fish. One Saturday, Wretch somehow managed to borrow his father's car, and he, Bertie Thompson, and I drove out to a little country school to a dance. Usually, we went just to watch the Saturday night fight, in which a couple of the seedier characters at the dance would shuffle around each other in the parking lot, saying things like, "So you think you can take me, huh? I don't think, I know. You and who else? I can take you with one hand behind me. Yeah, yeah," and so on. They would shuffle around each other, repeating these phrases for half an hour or so, hoping someone would jump in and say, "Okay, break it up, you guys." If no one said, "Okay, break it up, guys," then sooner or later they would have to roll around in the gravel of the parking lot for a while to satisfy the spectators who had stood around listening to all the boring chit-chat. But this Saturday night our plan was different. The idea, as I understood it, was to meet some girls and see if they wouldn't let us take them home. I was a little nervous about the venture because I didn't know that much about girls, and the very thought of actually taking home filled me with a secret dread. The dread was secret because I had somehow managed to give the impression to the other guys, I don't know how, that I was an experienced ladies' man. "Oh boy," Bertie said when we drove up to the school. "I got a feeling we're going to get lucky tonight." "Oh boy," I said, wiping my palms on my good pants. It turned out to be a pretty nice dance. Rancid Crabtree was there, whooping it up with his girlfriend, Ginger Ann. I danced a couple of dances with Ginger Ann just to get loosened up a bit. She was soft and warm to the touch, and smelled nice too, and pretty soon I was wondering if Rancid would mind if I took Ginger Ann home, just for practice. "You got a ride home tonight, Ginger Ann?" I ventured. "You bet I have, sweetie," she said. "Now why don't you go dance with that pretty little girl over there? Maybe she don't have a ride home." Why, my eyeballs almost suffered cardiac arrest. Standing against the wall was about the cutest girl I'd ever seen, her tawny hair framing her big blue eyes, perky nose, and sullen mouth. I sauntered over to her. Hi, my name is Patrick." "So?" Uh, so, uh, I was wondering if you had a name." "Sure I have a name. Pearlie." "Oh, well, Pearlie, would you go home with me? No, I mean, would you like to dance?" Pearlie practically leaped at the invitation. "Oh, I guess so," she said. My suavity had paid off. I danced the next two dances with her, being very cool and sophisticated so she would know I was a man of the world. Every time I tried to ask her if she had a ride home, though, the words didn't come out right. Uh, I said to her suavely, "You must be getting very warm from all this dancing. You're sweating like a pig, you know. Uh, do you have, would you like, some of that nice cool lemonade over there?" "I sure would," she said. I'd like to soak my sore feet in it. Pearlie may have been cute, but she had a bit of a mean streak, too. As I was handing her a glass of lemonade is when the terrible misunderstanding occurred. Someone bumped me hard from behind, and I dumped the lemonade right down the front of Pearlie's dress. Well, I was embarrassed and angry, and assumed the bump had been deliberate, a little practical joke perpetrated by either Wretch or Birdie. "Watch it, you moron!" I snapped, "or I'll—" "You and who else?" Recognizing fighting words when I heard them, I slowly turned around. There stood a menacing mountain of bone and muscle that appeared to be, if not the missing link in the chain of human evolution, at least a misplaced one. He was a head taller than I, and had real biceps, which looked like turtles doing push-ups in his shirt sleeves. "I want to go home," Pearlie said, speaking my exact thought. "Don't you want to stay for the fight?" the lynx said to her. "What fight?" I asked. "The one between me and you," the lynx said, thumping my chest with a finger the size of a cucumber. "Now let's go out to the parking lot." Of all the possible destinations under my feverish consideration, the parking lot held such a low priority it didn't even register on the scale. But by now, some interested spectators had gathered around us and were offering words of encouragement to both sides. With an audience looking on, I didn't feel I could resort to defensive groveling without at least going through the traditional fight ritual. "So, you think you can take me, huh?" This utterance so delighted and surprised my adversary that he burst out in a harsh laugh. "Yeah, I do." "You and who else?" Then I heard Birdie's voice whispering urgently in my ear. I hoped he had some plan for escape. "You know your new fly rod? I was wondering if, after the fight, I could—" Suddenly, Rancid Crabtree was standing between Missing Link and me, shoving us apart. Wow, I thought, that was close. Now Rancid would say, "All right, you guys, break it up." "All right, folks, I'm here to tell you this ain't going to be no bloody spectacle put on for your amusement. You all just go on about your dancing and let these fellows go out to the parking lot and settle their differences man to man in private. I'll go along just to make sure it's a fair fight." What? Is he stark raving mad? This guy's going to kill me. Rancid's little speech resulted in a good deal of disappointment, most of it apparently mine. Everyone else seemed to prefer dancing a polka to watching a pokey. The last thing I wanted was a fight, fair or unfair, making so little difference as to be inconsequential, because in either case, I was going to get murdered. The three of us walked out to the parking lot, the link rolling up his sleeves over his bulging biceps. I rolled up my shirt sleeves over where my biceps were supposed to be, but hadn't yet put in an appearance. If they were ever going to show up, now was a good time. "First thing," Rancid said, "I don't want to see no eye gouging or ear biting or putting the boots to a fella while he's down. Of course, it's okay while he's still standing up." The link sneered, an expression I took as a clear indication he did not hold such sissy rules in high regard. "Now, I'm going to give each of you fellas a little tip about fighting," Rancid went on, "since I've had a considerable experience with it in my day. But I better whisper it in your ears so t'other fella can't hear it. You first," he said to the link. "I don't need no tip about fighting," the link said. I believed him. "You get it anyway. Rancid said, because otherwise you might just end up beaten into a little pulpy mess that would make people sick to their stomachs just to look at you, and somehow folks might think I was to blame. Now, you don't want that, do you, Harry? Harry? I thought. Rancid must know the link. Rancid put his arm around where Harry's neck would have been if he'd had one and started whispering. I could tell it must be very valuable information because of the startled look on the link's face. All the time he was whispering, Rancid kept smiling and hugging Harry's head, which caused Harry to wince. And every once in a while, they would look over at me, and the link would kind of shake his head in a little jerking motion. I was beginning to wonder if Rancid was giving my opponent a tip or a 5-minute lecture in mayhem. Then a strange thing happened. Harry tore his head loose from Rancid's hug, scurried across the parking lot, leaped in his car, or somebody's car, and roared off down the road, spraying gravel over half the school playground. Rancid stood there in the parking lot, hands on his hips, rocking back and forth on the balls of his feet, smiling his big snaggle-toothed smile and staring after the rapidly diminishing taillights. Shoot, he said. I guess that fella just remembered some business he had back in town. There won't be no fight after all. I let out the breath I had caught when the link had first thumped my puny chest. What about my tip? I said. Rancid looked puzzled for an instant. Oh, that, he said. I don't reckon you'll be needing your tip. When Rancid and I walked back into the dance, a murmur of amazement drifted around the room. Rancid patted me on the back and turned to a group of men standing by the door. I never seen nothing like it, he told them. Boy, it's like a gold-dang pile driver. You'd never guess it, looking at them puny arms of his, would you? I bet old Harry don't stop running till sunup tomorrow. The men all grinned, looking at my puny arms. Wretch and Bertie came over to congratulate me and said they knew I could hold my own with the link. Yeah, and I was just fooling when I asked about your fly rod, Bertie said. I figured all along you could lick him. How come do you suppose Rancid wouldn't let anybody watch? I don't know, I said. It was pretty violent. I hope I didn't get blood splattered all over my good pants. Suddenly, Pearlie was standing in front of me. You know what you went and done? She said, her blue eyes flashing. First you dumped lemonade all over my dress, and now you beat up my ride home. The link was your ride home? He's my cousin is all, Harry Pitts. Sorry, I said. I didn't know. Well, now you're going to have to take me home yourself. Oh, boy, Bertie said, poking me in the ribs. Oh, boy's right, Wretch said, slapping me on the back. I'll even loan you my old man's car. Don't mess it all up either. Oh, boy, I said, my voice hardly cracking at all. This was not my night. To tell the truth, taking home wasn't what it had been cracked up to be. Pearlie sat hunched against the door on her side of the seat and devoted most of her attention to chewing a fingernail, the world's largest hangnail. Occasionally, she would snap directions at me, but that was about all the conversation I could get out of her. Turn there. Take a left at the crossroads. Go through that gate. After half an hour, it occurred to me that we were getting pretty far into the mountains, and I was beginning to wonder if I could find my way back again. The road deteriorated into an overgrown pack trail, and I was tearing up brush and small trees with the bumper of Wretch's old man's car. Holy cow, I said finally. How much farther is it anyway? Drive through that creek, smarty, Pearlie snapped, and we'll be nearly there. I imagined the look on Wretch's old man's face if he could see me driving his car through a creek. It was pretty terrible. A frightening thought suddenly hit me. Suppose Harry Pitts was at Pearlie's house. Either I spoke the thought aloud or Pearlie read my mind. "Nah, Harry won't be there," she said. "It's my grandpa's place. I'm staying with him for the summer." We drove into a clearing, at the far edge of which was a huge old log house. There was something about the place that caused the hair on the back of my neck to lift. This is your Grandpa Pitt's place?" I asked. "No," she said. "This here belongs to Grandpa Scritch." "Grandpa Scritch? Scritch? Scritch?" As I simultaneously gunned the engine and attempted to push Pearlie out the door, a great mean voice roared out, "Whoa there!" I had no trouble recognizing the voice. I stalled the engine just as Scritch himself stepped into the headlight beams. "Now you gonna get it, I bet," Pearlie said in her mean, squeaky little voice. "Step out of that car, boy," Scritch ordered. "What you doing with Pearlie? Get on up the house there, so as I can get a better look at you." It soon became apparent that Harry had sneaked Pearlie off to the dance without telling Grandpa Scritch. By the time we got to the house, she was crying and saying that everything that had happened was my fault. I did not anticipate that the next few moments would be among my happier ones. I did not even anticipate there would be many next few moments. If Scritch had threatened to skin me over a few fish, what would he do to me for kidnapping his granddaughter? Worse yet, for taking her home. Scritch turned up the lantern on the table and glared at me. "Now what's this all about?" he said. We, I explained. "He whupped Harry," Pearlie blurted out, "and afterwards Harry run off and left me at the dance." "Whupped Harry?" Scritch boomed. "No." "Yes," whimpered Pearlie. "Good gosh almighty!" Scritch bellowed and brought his fist down so hard on the table the lantern flew up in the air almost as high as I did. "Sir," I said, "there may be some misunderstanding about that." But it was too late. Scritch stepped around the table and came for me. I backed against the stove and shut my eyes, and then Scritch had me by the hand, crunching all my finger and knuckle bones into little splinters, and I supposed that he would then move on and do the same to the other parts of my body, one piece at a time. But then I realized he was pumping the remains of my hand up and down. He was shaking my hand and laughing. I had never in my life heard even a rumor of someone's having seen Scritch laugh. Pearlie seemed amazed too, and if I wasn't mistaken, disappointed. "Laddie," he said after a bit, still squeezing the remains of my hand, "anybody who whups that no-good Harry Pitts is a friend of mine. If you can see your way clear, I'd like for you to whoop his daddy, too." Then he laughed again. "Ha, ha, ha, ha. Yep, from now on, laddie, you count yourself my friend. And old Scritch don't have many friends." "That's hard to believe, sir," I said. "It's true, and that's the way I like it." I thought it might not be too easy being Ketchum Scritch's friend, but it was a darn sight more pleasant than being his enemy. After he had finished squeezing my hand, he poured Pearlie and me each a glass of buttermilk, and we set out a plate of dry biscuits. I formerly had loathed buttermilk, but now it's to be far and away my favorite beverage. The dry biscuits tasted more delicious than the finest chocolate cake I'd ever eaten. Thus does a near brush with death heighten one's appreciation of the humbler things of life. Scritch sat across the table from me, staring at my puny arms. "So you whupped Harry," he said. "Well, I be danged." "I guess I better be going," I said. There are a couple of other fellows at the dance who might be needing the car.
I like you, Scritch said. I don't know why, but I do. If you want to take Pearlie out again sometime, it's all right with me.
I looked at Pearlie. She stuck out her tongue. Thanks anyway, I said, but I'm more used to older ladies.
I can understand that, Scritch said. Anyway, if there is ever anything I can do for you.
I stopped. My trembling, mangled hand rested on the doorknob. There might be something, I said. For many years afterwards, up until the time old Ketchum Scritch died, whenever I felt the urge to catch a mess of cutthroat trout, I had my own secret place, a mountain stream where golden light dappled the water beneath a fluttering veil of alder leaves. I never saw either Pearlie or Harry Pitts again, and as far as I was concerned, that was much too soon.